come, and he's going to take us on a tour of the stained glass windows. You guys are here every Sunday. You look at these windows. I think they are some of the most beautiful in Pennsylvania. I'll put it that way. So take notes. There might be time for questions afterwards. What do you think? We let them ask questions?
If they want to.
You can ask questions. We can't promise answers, but so this is unrehearsed. I'm just going to follow him around, and here we go. Where are we starting? Okay.
A couple of words of introduction.
Okay, sure.
When this building was constructed in 1903-04, that is the part of it we're sitting in now, the original part, the bricks from the old church up at the cemetery had to be brought down, and they are in the walls of the original part of this church. Those bricks date back to 1844. Another remembrance of the old church that we brought down were the pews, which date to 1889. The stained glass windows, to the best of our knowledge, were new when the building was constructed. That is, they were put in by folks who donated. We thank God for the beauty that we enjoy with these windows every Sunday, and we thank God for the dedication of the folks who put them here. I'm going to wander around a little bit. You can follow up there. Norman has, with his always efficient manner, got them ready so he can give you a look up there of a picture of each window on the screen as we go. I'm going to talk about the people. Jimmy's going to talk about the windows and the symbolism thereon.
This church was built in 1904. Denny helped to build part of it.
I was going to say that I didn't know the folks whose names are on these windows, honest. Oh, I did want to tell you, I got the information on these people at the request of the trustees some years ago from a minute book of the trustees. We have the dates to 1885, from census records for 1900, the nearest census to that time, and from the recollections of people who were here and did know those folks, even if they were not living at the time that the church was constructed. They knew the folks whose names were on here. One of them was Herb Gill, a long-time superintendent of Sunday school and the first lay leader of the church. A second one was George Gill, no relation as far as I know. George was a carpenter and contractor and a faithful member of the church. He's also the only person I ever met who lived in 3 different centuries. He was born in 1899 and died in 2004.
Wow.
So he knew quite a few of these people. The third was Mrs. Laura Prang. If you know Nadine Hook, Laura was her mother. And again, as a young woman, Laura knew a number of these folks, so I'll reference them as we go along. These windows up here on the platform are often overlooked. This one over here, donated by Emma Gill in memory of her father, Thomas Gracie. Emma Gill and her husband, Lou, had a farm which has since been absorbed into other farms, which was located on Lehman Road, down near where it intersects with Street Road, where West Fallowfield Township and Upper Oxford Township join. So that's that one. Over here, a window in memory of Rebecca Moore, donated by her parents, John and Mary. More about the Moores a little later. Now, if I can get down here without breaking my neck.
Before you go on, let me comment about the grapes. The picture before that, you see the cluster of grapes? What do you think that represents in the Bible? Pardon? Well, let me read something to you. Revelation 14. Another angel came from the temple and shouted to the one sitting on the clouds, "Swing the sickle, for the time of harvest has come. The crop on earth is ripe." The one sitting on the clouds swung his sickle over the earth, and the whole earth was harvested. After that, another angel came from the temple in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. Then another angel who had power to destroy with fire came from the altar. He shouted to the angel with the sharp sickle, "Swing your sickle now to gather the clusters of grapes from the vines of the earth, for they are ripe for judgment." The cluster of grapes has to do with end times judgment. When Christ comes back, he will come to judge. He will come to judge. What about the one with the wheat? The wheat and the chaff. What's that remind you of?
Harvest, bread,
Right? What did Jesus say about the one seed? Unless it dies, it will not produce more. Unless we die to Christ, which is what we're supposed to do, and then live for him to produce more.
As you can see, the window over here behind the piano, dedicated by Robert Hamill and his family. Robert Hamill was the superintendent of a creamery where local farmers brought their milk. It was located along present-day Route 10, just beyond the intersection with present-day Route 41. The buildings are no longer there, but that's where they were located. Bob Hamill was also very active in the church. He had been a trustee. He had served the church very faithfully, and he and his family dedicated this window. Interesting enough, in those days before air conditioning, when a day like this, they would probably have that window open. If Bob were sitting right about where Linda is now, he could look out and he could see his home right across the parking lot out here. Yeah, that house still standing is where Bob Hamill and his family lived. May Osmond was sexton of the church at the time that this building was constructed. She and her husband, Harry, had lived down the Homeville Road, a house that's no longer there. Her husband had been a farmer, and he also, after a while, rented himself and his horse out. He plowed gardens, he planted potatoes, things like that. He was gone by this time, so she presented the window in his memory. There will be another Osmond I'll refer to, whose name is on the window out in the vestibule. That was her son. He was a trustee, and he also was choir director. Laura Prang said she could remember as a young girl seeing him directing. He wore glasses, but he always had the glasses up on his forehead as he was directing the choir. Funny what things stick in people's minds. So that would be May Osmond.
That picture there, what verse in the Bible does that remind you of? What chapter? It's called the love chapter. 1 Corinthians, the last verse in that chapter. Now there abideth these three, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Charity, the old word for that. The anchor, what's that remind you of? Fishing, okay. Reminds me of an old hymn in the church. Will your anchor hold in the storms of life, when the clouds unfold their wings of strife, when the strong tides lift and the cables strain? Will your anchor drift or firm remain? Do you remember the chorus, anybody? We have an anchor that keeps... Nobody? The chorus goes, we have an anchor that keeps the soul. Yeah, I know. I'm as old as Denny, so you don't know these old hymns. So I helped him build this church, by the way. We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll. Fastened to the rock which cannot move. What rock is that? Come on, people. You don't know what rock you're fastened to? Not Peter, Jesus. Fastened to the rock which cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love. Will your anchor hold in the straits of fear when the breakers roar and the reef is near, while the surges rage and the wind blows? Will the angry waves o'er your ship overflow? Will your anchor hold in the floods of death when the waters cold chill your last breath? On the rising tide you can never fail while your anchor holds within the veil. We have an anchor. Will your eyes behold the morning light in the city of gold and the harbor bright? Will your anchor safe by the heavenly shore when life's storms are past forevermore? When we take our last breath, will we be anchored to Jesus, or will you be panicking? We have an anchor, and it's Jesus.
I've already managed to forget one. I was up on the platform.
Yeah.
You can't see it here for the screen, and the cross is up there, but behind it is a cross and crown, a sunburst. Don't know who donated that one. There's no name listed. Originally, that window was back there, and the one back there was up here. We'll explain a little why they were switched in a few minutes. But I'm going to mosey on up
Go
here.
ahead.
In those days, as for many years thereafter, there was a flourishing Sunday school here in the church, as most Methodists have. And the Sunday school, of course, presented this one. Several classes, even in my time, in the 40s and 50s, as I was growing up. Junior high class met here. Several adult classes met here in the pews. There was a partition about where Jen and Chuck and Sue were sitting, and beyond that there was, I think, another adult class. The clock there marked the place at the back where there was a stairway that led down. This is before the second part of the building was added later. That was in the late 1950s. And I can remember as a kid downstairs in what's now the dining room and the kitchen, we had some of the Sunday school classes there, and somehow they always dismissed us early, and we'd come charging, hooping and hollering up these steps, and we got shushed as we got to the top. But we had a big Sunday school in. Jean, I think, said when she taught Sunday school downstairs in that big room in the newer part of the building, she and Grace Gill and several others had, maybe 45 people? If you can imagine, if you're ever down there packing 45 little kids into that, you have some idea of how well the Sunday school did. We now just have one adult class. I wish we could get to the point where we have a flourishing Sunday school again.
Let me talk about the Lilies for a minute, if I would, Denny. I don't know about you, but I just have difficulty picturing Denny hooting and hollering. He does? The Lilies up there. Let's talk about the lilies. What's that remind you of in the Bible? Words of Jesus. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not. Yet in all their beauty, they are more arrayed than Solomon ever. Do you know anything about lilies? Jesus said, why worry about your clothing, ladies, gentlemen? Everything matches today. Jesus said, why worry about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't work. They don't make their clothing. And yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautifully as these. Did you know that lilies do not grow on mountains. Lilies only grow where? In the valley, lily of the valley. Lilies only grow down in the valley. Maybe there's a reason that God allows them to grow in the valley, because in between every mountain, in between every high that we have, in between every difficulty, in between every situation, there's always a valley. There's always a valley. And it's good to know that when we're in the valley that there's beauty and there's purpose there. We never see the lily being planted, but we know that they just show up. We may be troubled on every side, Apostle Paul, but not distressed. We are perplexed, but we're not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. It's not what we know, folks. It is who we know. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star, the fairest of 10,000. Yep. Amen.
Over here, Samuel Martin was one of the trustees. He's the only one whose name, one of the trustees at the time this part of the building was built, he's the only one whose name, for whatever reason, is not on the trustee window out there in the vestibule. He and his wife Annie chose to have their own window here. Sam Martin and his family lived down Route 10 on a farm at the corner of Street Road and what's now Route 10, a place that had been occupied earlier by the John Moore family. And again, we're coming to them in a little bit. Sam had farmed some, and then he was involved in real estate and was described in a census report as a landlord. He was also an ancestor of mine and Jennifer's and Brenda's and Nadine's. There are four of us here that are related, that were part of that family, the Martin family. No relation, I believe, to the Martins that are with us today, though.
I'm going to give you a hint on this one. Young man, where's my assistant? Would you come here, please? This is your hint. See if you can figure this out. Could you open that window? So where does that come from in the Bible? Huh?
No.
That's a dove with an olive branch in its mouth. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. After 40 days, Noah opened a window he made in the ark and sent out a raven, but it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. And then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water all over the earth. And it returned to the ark. Wait, I lost my place. Oh, so he brought the dove back into the ark. He waited 7 more days, and again opened the window in the ark and sent the dove out. When the dove returned to him in the evening, in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Thank you, Noah, for your assistance. Danny?
The window back here next to Carol and Brenda, as you can see, donated by Edward Long and family. Mr. Long was a barber, and he and his family lived at what was, to my most recent knowledge, the Nancy Lewis home. Does she still live down the street here, down Cochran Street? Yeah, on the left. Yeah, that's where he and his rather large family lived. They were quite active in the church, apparently. There was some debate when the new part of the building was constructed. They had to take out one window, and it was either this one or the Christian Endeavor window, and they decided to take out the Christian Endeavor since that organization was no longer active in the church, and they felt that the Long family should be remembered, so there they are.
In Revelation chapter 15, we read this about 7 angels. They were all holding harps that God had given them. They were singing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, and they were singing, "Great and marvelous are your works, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear you, glorify your name. For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous deeds have been revealed." Notice that God gave them the harps.
The next window, which is badly faded, you'll have to take my word for it, was donated by Reverend John and William Watkins in memory of their parents, John and Catherine. I know very little about them. I was unable to find anything. Nobody seemed to know. I know that the elder Watkins are, and John and his wife are interred up here at the cemetery, close to where some of our folks are. But beyond that, I can't really say any more about them, except that they apparently must have at some point belonged here. The elder Mr. and Mrs. Watkins have a couple of the oldest stones up there dating back to the 1870s and 80s. So they've been there a long time.
I looked for a reference to Hourglass. I couldn't find anything in the Bible, but I found an interesting passage from the Message about time. Here we go. You ready? Who has anguish? Who has sorrow? Who is always fighting? Who's always complaining? Who has unnecessary bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? It's the one who spends long hours in the taverns trying out new drinks. This is the Bible I'm reading, folks. Don't gaze at the wine, seeing how red it is, how it sparkles in the cup, and how smoothly it goes down. For in the end, it bites like a poisonous snake. It stings like a viper. You will see hallucinations and crazy things. You will stagger like a sailor tossed at sea, clinging to a swaying mast. And you will say, "They hit me, but I didn't feel it. I didn't even know when they beat me up. When will I wake up so I can look for another drink?" The Word of God, my friends.
The fellow in the pictured in the window up here in the center was not Christian H. Shirk. If some of you think so, people say, well, that's the name at the bottom. Christian Shirk was the fellow who donated that impressive window. He was the pastor here at the time this part of the church was constructed. Christian Church was here from 1902 to 05. He was a very capable man in addition to his ministry. He also apparently was a good leader and knew something about construction, because he led the men and boys of the church in digging out for the building here and bringing in field stones for the walls for the foundation, and helping with a number of the other things. Probably brought the bricks down from the old church, but quite a distinguished fellow. Now, the fellow in the picture is John Wesley. He, of course, was the founder of Methodism. John Wesley Honest did not get here to Cochranville. His only destination in North America was when in the 1700s, early 1700s, he came with his brother Charles to what became the colony of Georgia. John is a missionary and Charles is secretary to the colonial governor. John didn't have much success in Georgia. He went home rather disappointed, did much better there, and organized what eventually became a separate denomination, the Methodist Church. And he did appoint a number of bishops to come over here and lead in the forming of churches in this area. Where we are, in this part of Pennsylvania, in this area of Chester County, the Quakers were here first. The Mennonites were here pretty soon after, and the Methodists were right behind them. When our grandfather and grandmother Simmons came up here from West Virginia, our grandmother was a Lutheran, our granddad was Church of the Brethren. Neither of those denominations had a congregation around here. There were plenty of Methodists, so they became Methodists. So there you have John Wesley. Now, as I said, he was down there at the front of the church. Why was he moved? Well, the Wesley window began to fade, particularly his features, particularly his left eye. I remember a member of the congregation saying, "It looks like he's winking at us." So some folks thought, well, we ought to move Wesley out. He didn't belong there. If we didn't have a picture of Jesus there, we should have something like the cross and crown that are there now. So eventually, the two windows were switched. And John Wesley is back here, where he can still keep an eye on us.
He may have been up there winking at you, but now he's looking at me when I preach. And I'm telling you, it puts a lot on my shoulders. When John and Charles Wesley came to America, their message was about the love of God. So, here we go. The love of God, the love of God, how the Wesley brothers taught the love of God. John would preach and Charles would sing. It was the most unusual thing when the Wesley brothers taught the love of God. They'd come riding into town as the sun was going down. Folks from miles around would gather just to hear them sing and preach the love of God. John would preach and Charles would sing, and it was the most unusual thing. By the way, they both remained Anglican priests. They never became Methodist.
Back of Norman here is a window donated by John and Mary Moore. They were the same folks that donated the window in memory of their daughter Rebecca down there on the platform. John had been a trustee earlier. In fact, had been chairman of the trustees in the 1890s. They lived on the same farm that Sam Martin would occupy a little later. That is down there at the intersection of Street Road and what is today Route 10. But again, very, very active in the church. They had at least two other daughters. One of them, Miss Ruth Moore, I remember hearing about from my grandparents. She taught at a one-room school that was located up here where the cemetery is now. If you stand, say, at the new parsonage where Norman and his family lived, if you look over across Old 41 toward the right part of the cemetery, that's where the old church was. If you look to the left, that's where this elementary school was. Miss Ruth Moore would drive up there with a horse and buggy. And she would get out, and then she would give the horse a smack, and it would turn around and head back down to the Moore farm. And then a little before school was dismissed for the day, the Moore family would send the horse and buggy back up. Of its own accord, it would make it back up there for Miss Ruth to have a ride home then. So kind of interesting people, the Moores.
What does the Bible say that the chorus goes, what is a lamp unto our feet? What?
A light unto our path.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. And now the cup, Denny.
Okay, the chalice over here, to my left was donated by Samuel Criswell. Who was he? Well, I can tell you who he was not. He was not a member of the church here. He was either a widower or a bachelor, and he boarded 3 houses up on the left up Cochran Street with the Cochran family, Frank Cochran. And he was a dealer in livestock, particularly horses. I don't know that he ever attended here, but apparently he had his own reasons, and he donated the Chalice window here that we have back in this corner.
How about filling in the missing word here? Jesus took and gave thanks. Cup. Paul said we should examine ourselves before eating the bread and drinking the, come on folks, cup. Okay? Jesus said give of cold water, cup of cold water. How about 1 Corinthians 10:21, folks? Listen to this one. You cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You just can't do it.
Over here in this corner, Thomas and Harriet Gill were Herb Gill's grandparents, for those of you who remember him. And they had a farm at the intersection of Steelville Road and the Center Hall Road. They later moved into the big town of Cochranville and lived, I think, three houses down Cochran Street on the right, past the intersection with Church Street. Thomas was a very, very active member of the church as a trustee. Harry was very active as well. And this is their window.
I'll come back to this one. I want to close with that one.
All right, we're going to come down here now to the one that everybody notices. The Good Shepherd. This one was presented, as you can see, by the Ladies' Aid Society. That organization was founded in the year 1900 under the leadership of the pastor's wife, Mrs. E.T. Randolph. And over the years, this organization went under various names. Ladies' Aid Society, which our grandmother still called it frequently. Later called the Ladies' Society of Christian Service, the Women's Society of Christian Service, and then United Methodist Women. Unfortunately, the organization no longer exists. But they did provide certainly a window very inspiring and striking here. It cost $125, which was a considerable sum back in those days, back in 1904. Must have taken a great deal of work. Speaking of which, the women in that society were really the leading force in getting this church constructed. They went to the trustees and they said, we think we need a new church. The one up here at the cemetery is too crowded.